We have a big project that Stephen Ratcliffe undertook. It's called Sound of Wave and Channel. And in the end, it's 1,000 poems, 1,000 pages, 1,000 days in 2 volumes. And what Stephen Ratcliffe did pretty much every day for 1,000 days is he walked, we were there, the ModPo team was there, and we did this, we walked it with him, probably about a quarter of a mile down the road to a spot, well, it kind of looks like this sometimes, to a spot along the road in Bolinas, California, looking out over the water. It's a bay of the Pacific. And he decided to write a poem every day in which the first 3 lines of each page poem would pretty much describe what he sees from that one spot. And I think, Lily, you came with us and you saw that. And then the couplet at the end of each page would also say something about the scene or the weather. And then in the middle are 2 couplets, which are basically changed every poem. And what we've done is we've chosen 7 poems, roughly the first week of January. The book starts in October, so this is halfway through the first volume. And we have 7 poems that are very, very similar to each other. And we have going along with this in ModPoPLUS a recording of Stephen reading this poem, which if he reads the whole thing, which he's done a couple of times, including for pen sound, it takes a long, long time. And in fact, he's got a bit of a monotone. So I guess the first question I want to ask to anybody is, why a durational project like this? What's the point of a 1,000-page poem? And the way it was published, this is BlazeVox, I think, yeah. It was published in a Courier, non-proportional Courier font. So in other words, it reproduces the kind of plainness and the structural similarity there. So why do it? What's the point of a durational project like this? Allie, why do it?
I think there's something very meditative about it in terms of attention, especially when there's this consistent structure, where the point is not to, the point is not really to invent or observe in novel ways. It's to observe in faithful ways to whatever the experience is, while in the middle questioning the whole process of that process.
That's a great start. Can you add to it your level of interest in that kind of project? I mean, there's a lot of art out there that does this kind of thing. It's very obsessive, maybe even compulsive as well. It's conceptual. I'm going to do this for 1,000 days. It produces something impossibly big. It tries to defy what poetry is. Your level of interest?
I'm so down. I think there's something so affirmative about the choice to honor days in this way, and in a way honor mundanity. And it's a type of journaling that is just as quotidian, but in a different way, as like we normally think of as like keeping a diary, or it's just another way of like engaging your mind in a habitual manner.
Lily, you were there. We saw this.
Yeah.
Bolinas is a special kind of place, I guess, for the weather. It just seems so paradisal and consistent.
So, yeah, I mean, we were only there on one day, but now reading this poem, I can feel like I can say that our singular experience of the weather is like relatively consistent throughout the year.
And you, not only were you there, but you were also generally very interested in weather.
It's true. I love to read the weather. We live in a place where it's more like practical
Dynamic.
to read the weather every day to know how to get dressed and whatever. But so this is like a different experience to focusing on the weather every day.
Bolinas is flip-flops and shorts pretty much every day.
But what I think is, or a wetsuit if you're Stephen and you're going surfing.
That's right, he surfs.
But one thing I was thinking about is, you know, really what's the difference between one poet describing sunrise 1,000 times versus a bajillion poets describing sunrise like one time in a
And
poem.
pretending to make it really individual and unique.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah. So you framed it as a kind of radical project. It's
Yeah, I'm
kind
not
of
saying
an
that that's
anti-poetic project.
right. I don't know that that's what Stephen's bringing to it. That's
Yeah.
my as a reader of many poems about sunrise imagery or whatever. Like that's kind of what it made me think of.
So it's so precise and so unique, but it's every day in a place where the weather doesn't change that much, and so it kind of undoes the uniqueness, is what you're saying. In
Well, yeah,
a
and also-
beautiful kind of way.
And also, he's tried it 1,000 different times. So like, okay, you'd have to go to 1,000 different poets to get 1,000 different sunrise poems.
And here you
some
just
other
need
time.
one. That's very cool. You're making me even more interested in this. Who wants to pick up the whole question of the meditative quality of this thing? Anna?
I'm thinking about that. I think, Al, you sort of alluded to the fact that there's a number of artists who have tried a durational project.
Yes.
I think what's cool about durational projects is that they're necessarily projects of attention, attention from the poet or artist who's looking at whatever it is that they're looking at, or whatever topic it is that they're writing about, or whatever. And you're not then paying attention to like the broad subject, you're paying attention to minute shifts. And that puts the same work between on the poet who's doing the poeting and the reader who's then doing the reading to notice like these imperceptible shifts. I'm thinking about one of Claude Monet's later projects in his painting career called Poplars.
Wait a minute. Monet, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't do 1,000 days of those damn scenes, but in a sense he did. I mean, it's the same kind of mesmerizing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
I got excited.
You did a great job.
I got excited about the idea. Imperceptible. What was it? Shifts. You said. Okay. So why don't we? Those of you who have printouts. That was good. You came up with a good idea. I got excited about it. Forgive me. That idea was so cold and so sweet, or so sweet and so cold. For those of you who have printouts, why don't you put a few out together, and let's look at the imperceptible shifts in the first tercets, right there, because they're very similar. So Emily, do you have printouts? Would you read across the top line of as many as you can get?
Sure.
Are you situated to do that?
Yeah.
Okay. Read all the first lines.
Sure. Light coming into sky above still black. Light coming into sky above still black. Light coming into sky above black plain. Light coming into fog against invisible. Light coming into sky above still black. Light coming into sky above still black. Light coming into clouds above shadowed.
That's good enough. So what are the imperceptible shifts? It's really very subtle.
Often just one word at the time, a different modifier, a different noun.
Anyone else, Max? What do you see? It's the same.
It's the same thing. The shifts seem to be for his benefit and not in order to get a more accurate description. Like his mind is sort of introducing this variation because this is a really grueling thing to do.
Lily and then Ambrose. Lily, back to you on the weather. I mean, to have
It
the
just
kind
sounded
of
like you were an anchor. Like that.
after this break, we'll be back with Lily and the weather. And Lily said, "Here in Bolinas, the weather is going to be the same as yesterday. Why do you keep asking me?" There's something, it's one thing to say, tomorrow's going to be stormy, Friday's going to be perfectly clear, Saturday's going to be rainy but mild. There's something more profound almost about this weather. This is the kind of weather I imagined the Earth was supposed to have, where days are consistent and life is mesmerizing. If you go to the same place 1,000 days, you're basically going to be sure that the Earth is basically the same place.
Or it kind of reminds me of like if you were to read like a ship's log from like an ocean voyage, like maybe you're out in the middle of the ocean somewhere and you haven't got a lot else on the horizon to look at and describe but the weather and what's going on in your mind and on the ship. So, it kind of reads like 1,000-day voyage or something.
Let's read the second line, and then I'll ask Amber Rose to join the conversation any way she likes. Who wants to read the series of second lines? Okay, Gabe.
Ridge, pink line of cloud beside branch. Ridge, line of white cloud below branch. Of ridge, pink red cloud by pine branch. Ridge, bird slanting from right to left. ridge, song sparrow calling from branch, ridge, black pine branch moving in wind, ridge, jet passing above black branches.
I'm feeling very emotional in response to this. I can't explain it yet. Ambrose, what do you think's going on here?
With that line in particular?
Or, you know, really anything. Where are we now in this conversation? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think something that the repetition in the poem's prompts is a question of seeing, or it makes you start to question seeing and representation and how stable that seeing is. When you start to see the same thing over and over again, you maybe start to question, am I seeing the same thing, or what's different, or am I making something different because my mind wants to feed on some kind of variation that's not really there. And then it sort of becomes a test of how precisely can you try to represent this thing that your mind maybe starts to play tricks on you about what is and is not changing.
That's great. We have said, more or less in this grouping of pals for 8 years, we have said that the best poetry among the poems that we discuss are instances of extreme noticing. That is to say, shifting attention by valuing extreme noticing. This is an extreme version of extreme noticing. It's an obsessive one. But I mean, I think that the 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird is an example of extreme noticing.
I'm reminded
and
also.
Some others, right?
I'm reminded also of Kenny Goldsmith's two durational projects, Traffic and Weather.
Traffic is a great example, except it's not natural. But yes, it's a great example of exactly this.
But it's a similar sort of like, and what's different about those projects from like a actual procedural standpoint is that Kenny is transcribing the language of the 1010 winds, or what is it, 880? I can't remember which channel
it's
it is.
1010 winds.
1010 winds. The New York City weather and traffic and news channel. Transcribing, all these, the traffic and transit on the twos.
Right.
Transcribing that. So you see those imperceptible shifts that gradually add up to this accident has now cleared and traffic is moving just fine on this road.
Right.
While traffic is accumulating over here. But what's really exciting about this, I think, is rather than a transcription, which is its own kind of durational, its own kind of attentional project.
It's kind of a subjective lyric.
Yeah.
Except it's very precise in its subjectivity. So
that then gets to say something about that, right? And one in January 3rd, representation as picturing.
Yes.
Be carried on without other borders, viewed, such edge as turning shaft.
Yeah.
That's kind of what Ambrose was just saying.
Davey, your thoughts on this?
Something that must be changing in order to be able to get these perceptual moments right at sunrise is the time. These must be a couple of minutes apart. And the project that I keep thinking about in dialogue with this is the artist James Turrell's Skye Spaces, which are similar projects. There are a number of them, and they're basically contemplative meditative spaces in which like a square is cut out of a built space, either inside or outside, to be able to project consistent light that allows for the refraction of sunrise and sunset, to be able to like watch the colors in sunrise and sunset sort of like come apart into their components. And this strikes me as a related process of being able to keep everything consistent in this project by shifting it with the rotation of the earth. That the sun being in a slightly different place in relation to this like very consistent scene means that this is on the one hand a pattern that's rigorously consistent, on the other hand a pattern that has to change in order to catch these moments in the same place every day.
Yeah. I'd invite some other comparisons to poems that we talk about in ModPo, either on the basis of the repetitive approach or the kind of documentary durational project. Any others you can think of that work?
I have a sort of strange one. Really what it reminded me most of is Frank O'Hara, who I teach to high school seniors.
You almost forgot for a second.
Yeah, they're gone. They're gone.
School's
It's summer.
out.
Who are they?
School's out.
Exactly. And we talked a lot about, what is the impulse to chronicle your life and all its minutiae. And we talked about especially that impulse for a gay man in 1950s New York to record a sort of utopian artistic community, which maybe you didn't feel confident would last, right? To sort of eulogize yourself while you're still alive. And I think, right, writing a nature poem in 2019, right, there are so many nature poems, but there might not be nature in the way that we used to understand it. And when you think about things like climate change, life of the planet, like that is a duration that we don't really understand, which moves so slowly and so incrementally in tragic ways, too slowly really for our attention. So decide I'm just going to sit here and kind of memorialize my environment every single day. And this project, I think, responds to a sort of contemporary crisis in the only way that art maybe can right now.
What you said makes me think of an eco-poetics. I think this is an eco-poetic project in the sense of if we're really going to be in tune with the weather, we really need to pay this kind of attention this systematically. Need to really, really pay attention. Let's slow way down. I think May Bersenbrugge, who's not in our course at the moment or will be, also has the same concern. But you also, your point is so great because it also makes me think that preservation of a community that would be of interest or relevant to or aligned with a gay strolling poet in the 50s, that worry that ecology would go away too, it would become inhospitable. It did before it got better. It got a lot worse. So that's kind of eco-poetics, I guess, socio-eco-poetics. Other poem experiments in ModPo that seem to connect to what Stephen Ratcliffe is doing?
Can I say one more thing just to respond to Emily?
Yeah.
Just what Emily just said is so brilliant for a whole bunch of reasons, but one of the things that it made me think of is we understand weather as being like daily conditions of what's happening. Like today it's sunny, tomorrow it's raining, but climate to be like the broader durational
This is climate
system. This allows us to consider both weather and climate, and therefore allows us to maybe think about and respond to like what climate change might actually mean for a place.
That's a great point. Max, there's something hidden in here. I think we got to it, but we didn't really comment on it, which is that this project entailed Stephen Ratcliffe being in Bolinas every morning for 1,000 days. I mean, I don't think too many of us, I know we're not all jet setters and stuff, but surely in that 1,000 days you had something else to do. Now, he commuted to teaching at Mills College, not every day, but that was after this daily event. There's something really, really unusual now of someone who would be in a place and stay completely put in that place. And he's not a liar. This is a testament to that intense dailiness. Comment on that, Max?
For sure. There's something kind of monastic about it. I also thought of this poem as sort of Radcliffe as being a sentry on watch. Like this is his duty is every day to go look out go look at this same scene to make sure that everything is normal or nothing has changed. And it's a big part of a lot of the conceptual poets and works that we encounter is this merging of art and lifestyle in these ways that often what's most astonishing about the work is the way that the poet has incorporated it into their lifestyle, right? It's sort of at the expense of what we would imagine to be their well-being or their need to like take a vacation or even just like be sick and not go outside or whatever can happen to most people in the course of 3 years. So there's this sort of endurance test, right, of being able to every day go out and do this same walk, not just for the mind, but for the body, and for your finances. It's kind of remarkable.
Put. Dave, I want to turn to you because I don't think you've had a chance to say much about this poem, but Max is kind of hinting at a poetic ethics, a poetics, which is showing up every day or committedness. I mean, in a kind of subtle political way. This is a kind of long-term political project in the sense of standing guard, as you were saying. Yeah. So, Dave, your thought?
This reminds me of driving across country, in the sense, well, this type of project, this durational project, in the sense that somebody can tell you what it's like to drive across country, and you can know what it's like to drive across country, but to experience driving across country is something unique that you cannot get from other people telling you or just reading about it. Just the experience of being on the road for hours and hours, and sometimes not seeing the landscape change, sometimes seeing it, barely change. That's a singular experience that a durational project like this will convey. That can only be conveyed in this type of way. So,
Great. Final word. Who wants to get a final word on this project?
I want to say
Ambrose,
something.
please.
I was actually thinking of Earth, I Thank You. Is that the name of the poem?
The Anne Spencer.
Yeah.
Anne Spencer.
In thinking about that kind of stillness and the staying, to be in one place for 30 years? What? For 1,000 days? That would be a very long time. But kind of honoring the earth and that honoring being just being there and being quiet in that space and returning to that space with a kind of humble dedication and commitment, I think is really powerful, and it makes me think of that poem.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I mean, for better or worse, Homo sapiens developed into beings that could observe and do the subjectivity and have subjectivity, and now we have options, and one option is to be in contact with an Earth that presumably doesn't have a lot of alternate subjectivities. We have to do the subjectivizing ourselves. So in a way, this is our commitment, or in his case, his commitment to this particular scene, to be the human being who sees it and records it and kind of tries to be part of it, kind of puts a lie to some kinds of traditional nature poetry. Allie?
I think also reacting to what Emily was saying about like a poetics for this moment and for climate change. There's something about this project that reminds me a lot of Chronic Meanings.
Bob Perlman's pre-elegy.
In how it's a very specific amount of time, an increment of time that we have. And so at the beginning, in that first stanza, we have this specific moment of light and what it's doing. But by the last line, if you are to read across it like the way that we have done for the first two, that's actually not anchored towards any like particularity of light and time and rotation. And so the way that time passes, white line of jet trail across from it, gull gliding to the right toward point, egret gliding to the right toward point. It traverses minutes, like all of a sudden, like there's one day within these 1,000 days, and we don't know what happens after.
One last question, the mesmerizing quality of this. Gabe, you're a poet. Do you ever aspire to creating a mesmerizing experience, an experience where people would lose track of time, not know where you are, or have a voice that kind of induces a sort of somnambulism? It's not your kind of poetry, your own.
It's not my own, but I think like what interests me in this project is the way it can sit between and make seem related the feelings of awe and boredom, and those two feelings feeling actually really close to each other. When I think, if you just think of them on their own, they seem like opposites. That's an interesting proposition, and I actually agreed with your Bersenbrugge call out, because I think Bersenbrugge is somebody who's actually working in that same sort of thinking and thinking really slowly about how to experience phenomena, but this is maybe just personal, but I think awe and boredom is the experience of living in a world that's cycled, just a day is a cycle, and I think of the earth as a sort of cycle. And I think this book is really working with that. And the thing about a cycle is that it's always the same, it's always stupendous, and it's always quite boring. But
yeah. May Bersenbrugge has a poem called Slow Down Now. And I think this is a cognate project. We should all slow down. Thank you so much. This was terrific.